On today's show, we'll be talking about Ouija boards, demonic entities, visits from loved ones, and much more. All coming up on this episode of Paranormal Mysteries. Again, thank you for joining me and welcome. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. I really hope everyone's had a great week. And before we start, I'd like to say thank you to Charles for their support and generosity. If you enjoy the show, please remember to subscribe, share, and review the podcast. This supports us by helping new listeners to discover the show. And if you'd like to support us even further by becoming a patron or by donating, please visit us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. These links and others can be found within the show notes. And if you've encountered the paranormal and would like to share your story, please email me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com. All experiences, no matter how big or small, are always welcome. And with that in mind, today's first story comes to us from Jimmy. And Jimmy says, "Hello, Nick. I recently listened to your podcast and heard about the predator-type cloaked being, and I have had an experience, but I will keep it short. It happened while I was hiking in Utah, and I was alone on a hiking trail. I was looking around and saw a snake, and then it just vanished, and I saw a blur, and then I saw dust kicking up from something invisible. That was the only thing that happened, but I heard the other stories, and it reminded me of it, and it was just weird. Sorry if this isn't what you were looking for, but thank you, and I hope this story reaches you well." Our next story comes to us from Carlos, and Carlos's story is called My Grandmother and My One-Time Visit. Carlos says, "Hey Nick, I found out about your podcast through Spotify. I've binged it for the past week and have been hooked ever since. I wanted to give you 2 stories that I have. One was from my father about my grandmother, and the other is an actual experience that I had after a bad breakup. My family and I had been settled around a table talking about when my uncle and my father were kids and stories of that nature. My father got to talking about my grandmother and how when my mother was 3 months pregnant with me, my grandmother had passed away due to lung cancer. She was a serious chain smoker from what I've been told. So in the time that she was alive, she had always told my mother that she was going to give birth to a boy, which obviously she did. Well, when the time came and I was finally born, my father told me that after he had returned home from the hospital, the next 3 nights would be crazy and emotional for him. He said that my first night home, I had started crying in my room at around 3 a.m. He had woken up and was going to attend to me, and before he had reached my room, he said that he started to smell my grandmother's perfume and the cigarettes that she had always smoked. He was pretty tired, and he was walking in a haze when his adrenaline started pumping, and he opened the door to my room and noticed a silhouette of my grandmother. It was only a dark shadow that he saw in the darkness of my room, with also the small red glow of a lit cigarette. He was able to make out the shadow because of the knee-high old-fashioned dresses that she would always wear at the time, and the style of her hair. He then freaked out and didn't know what to think when he closed and then opened the door again, and she was gone. The next night came, and I woke up again at 3 a.m. This time, my dad wakes up, and this time, he was able to smell my grandma's scent in his room, but he couldn't get out of bed, and started to cry. He said that he waited a couple of minutes before going to my room, hoping that she wasn't there, watching again. But as he opened the door, there she was, standing next to my crib, watching over me. My father said that these were the craziest nights of his life, and he never experienced anything like it ever again. It's still pretty cool to know that there is a chance that you might have the opportunity to visit your loved ones one last time before heading to the light at the end of the tunnel. So this next story happened to me after a relationship that I had, and it was a pretty bad breakup. Well, after a couple of days after this breakup, I was sleeping in my bed one night, and I started to have a nightmare where I was out in the middle of the ocean and panicking pretty hard. I remember just seeing water and nothing else, I had also looked down into the water to notice that I was really floating with nothing to help me in the vast ocean. I really started to panic in my dream once I looked down, and as I peeked my head up again to look around, I felt the need to look under the water again, and at this time, I noticed I had 3 sharks circling underneath me. I didn't know what to do, and I started screaming. The final time I looked down, I saw that one of the sharks was lunging upward towards me, and as soon as I saw the shark about to grab me, I jumped awake from my dream. Once I opened my eyes, I realized that I had a dark figure with red eye slits laying directly in front of me, staring at me with its arms crossed in front of me, on top of my pillow. As soon as I noticed it, I somehow cocked my arm back behind me and punched my pillow as hard as I could, and before I even touched the pillow, the figure disappeared from in front of me. I've only told a couple of friends about it, but they would joke about it and pass it off as a bad dream. Hearing the stories about shadow people on your podcast really shot that memory back into my head about this memory of mine. Our next story of the night comes to us from Justin, and Justin's story may be graphic in parts for certain listeners, so please be warned. Justin says, "Hey Nick, I love the podcast and I have many true first-hand accounts to share with you. For now, I will just send this one. It is the craziest thing I have ever experienced in my life, and the family is still dealing with the repercussions of the situation. I am sorry for the length, but I wanted to make sure I explained everything to you. It would be an honor to have my story make it onto the show, and if you need any more information, please let me know. A link to the incident is at the end of the email. I will only use first names in this tale, as to protect the identity of those involved. First names will be accurate, as I have known this family my entire life, and if I start making up names, I will get lost. I have to tell you 2 stories in order to get to the one that I'm writing in about, so bear with me. This story is about this family. Pat, who is my best friend, his older brother Jake, younger sister Allison, mother Cheryl and father Peter, foster sister Jennifer, and foster brother George. And this first part of the story is called The House. The house was located at 64 Caswell Street, East Taunton, Massachusetts. The house in question is the place I spent most of my childhood. My parents were childhood friends of Pat's, and that turned into an early and lifelong friendship ever since I was in diapers. There was always something wrong with the house as far as I can remember. Strange noises, feelings of being watched, and seeing strange things were a common occurrence. Jake unfortunately took the brunt of the horrors throughout childhood, to the point that he had pushed a dresser in front of a stairwell door that led to his room on the 2nd floor because he didn't want to see the old lady anymore. I will elaborate on her. He was tormented by her on so many occasions that he opted to move his room to a finished part of the basement that would prove to be a mistake. The next few years were filled with night terrors, sleep paralysis, and shadow figures. Eventually, it got bad enough that he moved out and got an apartment, only to lose it and then end back up in that awful basement. I only saw her one time, but it was enough that I never wanted to be in that basement alone again. I was looking for Pat and Allison and figured that they might be down in Jake's room. Upon entering the basement, I found it empty, except for a few noises coming from the laundry area. Thinking it might be them, I started walking over. That's when I saw her. An old, rotten-looking hag. She was shaking while walking like something out of the Ring movie, just moving really surreal. She had big yellow eyes and bony hands like a demon. She turned to look at me, and I bolted up the stairs as fast as possible, never again to return to the basement. I could go on and on about all the creepy stuff that went on there, but for the sake of this making it on the show, I will end this section here. Anyway, around the time I was 8, they started adopting foster teens. There were plenty that came, got the love and support they needed, and went off to college or work to make room for the next needy teen. It was a great thing they did, and they helped a lot of good people. Then there was Jennifer, and everything changed. And this leads into the second part of the story. When I was about 10, they adopted Jennifer. Jennifer was the second to last foster kid that would ever step foot into Cheryl and Pete's house. She was 18, beautiful, smart, and headed in a good direction. She was always fun and sunny, and to be honest, my older brother I think had a crush on her, as they were the same age. The only thing she had going against her was living in that house, specifically in the bedroom on the first floor. For some reason, that was the room that so many of the foster kids had had bad experiences in with unexplained entities. It was a hotspot for the unknown. She was there for a few years, always creeping out us younger than her with the creepy stories she had to offer about that room. And after about 2 years in, she bought a Ouija board. Not a Parker Brothers mass-produced toy, but an old wooden one from the local random flea market. I'm not sure how many times she used it, but I do remember the last time like it was yesterday. We were helping her do some spring cleaning a few weeks before she was heading off to college. She had opened a drawer on her nightstand, holding the board, staring at it, and broke it in half over her knee, and she then threw it in the trash. Pat and myself both witnessed this and said nothing about it, continuing to help her clean the room so that the next foster would have a nice blank slate in a few weeks. Cut to a few days later, me and Pat are playing 007 GoldenEye on the N64 when we hear Jen scream. We come into the room to see what's up, and she is holding the Ouija board in her hands. It wasn't broken, with no tape or glue. She had found it under her mattress while flipping it. We were all freaked out, but her being the older, more rational one in the room, she calms down and says, "It's okay, I'll take it with me to college and freak out my roommates." Jumping ahead to the day that she leaves, she loads up the car and heads out for Boston University, I believe it was, with the Ouija board packed in the car, and drives away. But she never made it to her dorm. She was killed in a car accident on the way, and the reason for the wreck was never disclosed. She was a sweet soul cut short, and it will never leave our memories. But the last chapter in this story sometimes makes me think that she was better off not knowing what may have happened if she had stayed. This next chapter is the last in the story, and I call this chapter George. George was a beast. He weighed in at about 270-ish pounds and stood 6'5". Muscle upon muscle, he was built like an NFL linebacker, and he was very cool. He always made sure the family was safe, and he even came to a few fights to protect Jake and my older brother Corey. We always laughed and told stories while smoking, and I was around 14 at the time, and he was just a nice guy to be around, but a scary one to cross. He was family as far as we were concerned, and us to him. He stayed in Jennifer's room for about a year, and then the house finally took its toll. I remember the first day that he changed. Me and Patrick woke up after a long night of playing 007 GoldenEye on the N64, and went downstairs to make our favorite breakfast. We peered out the window to see George sitting in the garden cross-legged, as if meditating. All of a sudden, he sprang up to his feet, walked over to the basketball hoop, and grabbed it by the rim, and threw it like a toothpick across the yard, a good 30 or 40 feet. Needless to say, we were afraid of him for the first time, and ran upstairs in Patrick's room to listen to music for an hour or so, until the rest of the family was awake. By this time, he was normal, but we were still wary of him. Over the next 2 weeks, he was not himself, arguing with Cheryl and throwing things around. A few days later, right before dinner, he walked in the living room with a raw steak and slapped Patrick in the face with it. He said, "Do you see what they want me to do? Do you see what they want me to do for them?" Then he just walked away and went into his room. It was totally weird and unsettling. A few days after that happened, the house was full, and it was a Sunday morning. The smell of smoke woke Allison, and she walked to the top of their stairs, as all the bedrooms were on the second floor besides George. She ran to wake up her parents and her brothers so that they would escape safely from the burning house. It turns out that George, just a few minutes before, had poured a can of gasoline on himself and sat on the couch and then set himself on fire. The family raced out of the second-story window in Patrick's room, as it had a slope that wasn't so far off the ground, and the stairs were beginning to be engulfed in flames. Everyone made it out of the house, and as they turned the corner to the driveway, there was George. He had sat in the fire until this time, and his flesh was smoking. He was wielding 2 kitchen knives and looked right into Patrick's eyes and said, "What's the matter, bro? Don't you love me anymore?" He then began stabbing himself in the stomach and chest. Needless to say, this messed up Pat for years, and eventually he turned to drugs, as did Allison, to take the memories away. But they made a full recovery since then, thankfully. The fire department finally showed up along with the police officer, and George immediately rushed to the fire truck and tried to stab a firefighter until he was blown off of his feet by the fire hose. And amazingly, despite his seemingly fatal injuries, he rose back up to his feet and rushed a second time, only to get hit with the fire hose again, which took him out of his shoes. He was then taken to Morton Hospital, and then Taunton State Mental Hospital, where he stayed for a few years, and is now released. When we mustered up enough courage to go and see him face to face, he was greatly disfigured, and was a mere shell of the man that we once knew and loved. He had no recollection of the incident, and only knew of it through the news stories he had heard. He had nothing to say except apologies, and how much he loved all of us. But the last thing he said still sticks with us to this day. He leaned in and said, "You know that house made me do it. It wasn't my fault. Whatever I did, or they say I did, I don't remember. Every night it was shadows and demons for me, and I knew that staying there was bad for me, but I was trying to protect all of you from that damned house." Since then, we've never spoken to him, but I have seen him working for the state of Massachusetts as highway repair or whatever they do. And sadly, I must report that a new house was built on that property. I just hope that they never experience anything like that. Our next story of the night comes to us from Keith, and Keith's story is called A Strange Happening. Keith says, "This happened to me in my early teens when I used to live in South Africa. My mom would say sometimes that the flat we lived in was haunted and that she had had some strange experiences when she would be alone in the flat. I was sitting in the living room of our flat watching TV with my mom and brother. The show that we were watching had a commercial break, so my mom and brother both got up to go to the kitchen and grab something to drink. And that's when it happened. All of a sudden, the closed caption came on, which was something we never used. The TV we had was pretty old, and I really don't think it even had closed captioning settings that were easy to turn on. But it came on just as my mom and brother left the room. It said, 'I'm going to kill you,' and then nothing. Then it came on again and said, 'I'm going to kill you.' These words on the closed captioning didn't match the words coming out of the speakers. I was so shocked, as I had never seen anything like this happen before. It's as though the message was designed just for me. Otherwise it would have come on when the others were also in the room. I truly felt like some malevolent force was out to get me. Nothing ever came of it though, and I moved from that flat shortly after when I moved to North America. This is one of two unexplainable things that has ever happened to me, and perhaps sometime I will tell you of the second. Thanks for all the hard work you do, and I hope you keep it up, as it's a great platform for people to share their experiences." Our next story comes to us from Isabella, and Isabella's story is called Ouija Board Best Friend. Isabella says, "I play a video game called Phasmophobia with my friends, and we have had some pretty funny scares, but not this one. I remember playing Phasmophobia with my friends when we became intrigued enough to do a Ouija board session, along with the spirit box. My best friend asked, 'Who is here with us?' and we then heard the spirit box say, 'John.' John was the name of our friend that had committed suicide. I then asked, 'How did you do it?' and the spirit box replied, 'Neck, slain, kill.' I went to sleep later that night, and I remember waking up and looking at my window, only to find John, his spirit as vivid as day, looking at me and saying, 'I'm okay now. No sorrow.'" Our next story comes to us from Nick, and Nick's story is called Spirits. Nick says, "Hi Nick, this story is about my nephew who saw my grandma and grandpa in the trees as blue jays. Me and my brother-in-law were just talking outside when two blue jays flew into the trees right next to his house. We started talking about how when my grandmother died, a blue jay sat on her fence the whole day. My nephew was 5 at the time, and he has never met my grandparents. He came up to us and started to wave at the blue jays, and my brother-in-law and I started to smile. And then, all of a sudden, my nephew said, 'I'm doing well,' all while looking at the blue jays. We asked him who he was talking to, and he said, "The nice man and lady in the tree." No one had ever told him that we believe that seeing a blue jay means that it's my grandma, and to this day, I still believe that it was my grandma and my grandpa watching over and saying hi to us. As we come to the end of tonight's episode, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in and supporting the show, and a special thank you goes out to Jimmy, Carlos, Justin, Keith, Isabella, and Nick for sharing their experiences with all of us. If you'd like to share your thoughts or similar experience with one of tonight's storytellers, please email me and I'll be sure to forward your message onto them. If you've witnessed something that you can't explain, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit us at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday with our next episode. From everyone at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.